Damn it, you're nothing but trash. Get out before you dirty my house. The words struck Penny like a slap she never saw coming. Max's voice, her younger brother's voice, the one she'd soothed as a child, defended in schoolyard fights, covered for when he stumbled through his 20s, now cut through the heavy air of the family home with a cruelty so sharp it seemed to strip the wallpaper from the walls. Penny hadn't expected it to happen so fast. The will had barely been read an hour ago, their father's ashes still settling in the urn on the mantel, when Max turned on her like a stranger who'd been waiting all along to bare his teeth. "You're filthy. You're a parasite," he spat, his eyes blazing with triumph rather than grief. "This is my house now, my money. You are nothing but a leech." The words echoed across the parlor where casseroles still crowded the sideboard and a half-drunk jug of sweet tea sweated on the counter. Outside, voices from neighbors lingered in soft southern cadences, offering condolences in the driveway. Penny felt her skin burn with shame, though she had done nothing wrong. She had sat beside their father through the chemo nights, carried him to bed when his legs failed, read scripture when he asked for peace. And now the one person she had trusted, her brother, the boy she had once rocked to sleep, looked at her as if she were vermin scuttling across the floor. She tried to breathe through it, steady as her father had taught her. "Justice isn't fair, it's what you fight for," he always said. But the memory of that wisdom only deepened the sting. She swallowed hard. "Max," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't you Max me?" he snapped, his face flushed with heat. "You heard the lawyer? Everything goes to me. $500 million, Penny. 500 million. That's what Dad left, and I'm not about to let you drag me down. You were just here because he pitied you. But I don't. You don't belong here. You never did." The cruelty in his eyes was worse than the words. Penny remembered the boy who used to chase fireflies with her in the yard, his small hand gripping hers when thunder rolled over the Georgia pines. She remembered bandaging his knee after he fell from his bike, remembered covering his report cards so their father wouldn't scold him. She had loved him fiercely, the way an older sister loves the sibling she half-raised. And now he was erasing her with a few bitter sentences. "I don't want your house," Skay said quietly, though her voice trembled. The steadiness she tried to project tasted like ash on her tongue. Max smirked, adjusting the collar of the suit he'd barely managed to keep straight during the funeral. "Good, then leave. Take your pity with you. You've been nothing but dead weight since the day Dad got sick. A sponge. A burden." She stared at him, searching for any trace of the boy she once knew. But his face had hardened into something unrecognizable, lines of greed cutting deeper than grief. Penny realized then that she wasn't just losing her father. She was losing her brother, too. Her eyes wandered across the familiar living room, the scuffed coffee table their father had built in his workshop, the old Braves pennant sagging over the fireplace, the framed photos of summers long gone. This had been her safe harbor, her anchor through widowhood, heartbreak, and endless nights of caregiving. And now it was no longer hers. The air was heavy with the smell of lemon polish and lilies, the kind neighbors brought to funerals when words failed. Penny's heart ached. She thought of the times she had carried plates of fried chicken and cornbread into this kitchen, feeding Max when he was too lazy to cook. She thought of Thanksgivings where she had been the one to carve the turkey because their father's hands shook. All those years, all that love, dismissed in an instant as trash. Her suitcase lay by the stairs where she had dropped it earlier, packed with the black dress she had worn for the service, a cardigan that still smelled faintly of her father's aftershave, and a notebook filled with medication schedules, doctors, names, and late-night notes she had written when exhaustion blurred her eyes. Proof of devotion, proof of sacrifice, proof Max had never seen because he had never looked. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Max said, stepping forward, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "The neighbors are watching. Walk away quietly." Don't embarrass yourself any more than you already have. She wanted to scream, to tell him the truth. Their father had confided in her that the money wasn't what he thought, that the fortune he was salivating over was already spoken for, tied up in debts and collateral that would unravel faster than Max could spend it. She wanted to hurl that truth like a stone at his arrogance. But her father's voice stopped her steady, calm, reminding her to choose the moment, reminding her that anger wasted itself while patience sharpened into power. Penny lifted her suitcase. The weight of it was nothing compared to the heaviness in her chest. "I'll go," she said, and her words came out softer than she intended, almost gentle. Max's mouth twisted into a grin of victory. Good riddance. She walked past him, out onto the porch where the summer dusk settled like a quilt over the neighborhood. The porch swing creaked in a faint wind, and she remembered nights swaying there with her father, his low voice telling stories of ball games and battles with zoning boards, lessons about work, honor, and dignity. She remembered his last night, his hand squeezing hers, his whispered words, "Be steady, Pen." She stepped down the porch stairs, the suitcase thumping behind her. At the curb, Mrs. Alvarez from across the street pressed a container of pecan pie into her hands, her eyes wet. "For later, honey," she said softly. "You call me if you need anything." "Yes, ma'am," Penny answered automatically, her voice breaking on the formality. She slid the suitcase into the trunk of her sedan, leaned for a moment against the hot metal, and closed her eyes. The night hummed with cicadas and muffled laughter from the neighbors trying to pretend they hadn't heard the shouting. She could still feel Max's words clinging to her skin like grime. Trash, parasite, leech. But beneath the sting, a steadier voice rose within her, her father's. Voice.com as ever. "Justice isn't fair. It's what you fight for." Penny climbed into the driver's seat, the car smelling faintly of coffee and pine. She glanced in the rearview mirror once, just once. Max stood on the porch, a silhouette holding an envelope he didn't understand. The glow from the house behind him making him look both powerful and desperately small. Then she turned the key, the engine catching, headlights sweeping across the lawn. Atlanta's night opened before her, a web of lights and long roads humming with possibility. She pulled away from the curb, carrying grief, betrayal, and something else that felt almost like relief. She did not look back again. The next morning broke with a hazy light over Atlanta, the kind that softened the edges of everything, yet made Penny's bones feel older than her 45 years. She sat upright in the stiff bed of a roadside motel, her suitcase by the door, her phone buzzing with unread messages from neighbors and church friends. She ignored them. Her hands still trembled from the night before, replaying Max's words over and over. Trash, parasite, leech. The venom lingered long after she'd driven away from the family porch. Headlights carving through streets she'd once ridden down on her bike with Max chasing after her. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quiet the ache. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. A single chair by the window held her cardigan, and outside, traffic hummed along the interstate. She remembered the casseroles stacked on the kitchen counter, the neighbors with their murmured condolences, the pecan pie Mrs. Alvarez had pressed into her hand like a lifeline. She hadn't eaten it yet. She hadn't eaten at all. Instead, she sat with the notebook she'd carried from her father's bedside, its pages still marked with careful notations, dosages, appointment times, lists of questions for doctors who never had enough answers. That notebook was more valuable to her than Max's envelope. It was proof of devotion and a reminder of who her father had been. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Penny," said a familiar voice. It was Martin Hale, the family's longtime attorney, the man who had stood by the fireplace yesterday, his glasses slipping down his nose as he read the will aloud. "I wanted to check on you. I imagine things got difficult." His hesitation was deliberate. He knew more than he said. "They did," Penny replied, her voice rough. "Max wasted no time reminding me I'm not wanted." Martin sighed. He's not himself. Grief brings out the worst in some. No, Martin, she said, sharper now. That was himself. I've seen him dodge chores, chase schemes, and waste chances. But last night, that was him without restraint. That was my brother when he thinks he's finally won. There was silence on the line. Then Martin's voice lowered. You remember what your father told you privately, don't you? Penny closed her eyes. She remembered vividly. The hospital room quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor. Her father's hand weak but insistent as he gripped hers. The money isn't what it seems, Penny, he'd whispered. It's collateral. $500 million tied to a loan, a project gone wrong. If Max ever thinks he's rich, he'll learn otherwise. Promise me you won't let him dishonor my name. When it unravels. Yes, she whispered now. Martin cleared his throat. Max believes he's inherited an empire. He'll find out soon enough that it's a house of cards. Till then, he'll lash out at anyone he thinks stands in his way. That means you, Penny. Stared at the motel ceiling, the swirl of plaster like storm clouds frozen in time. He already has, she said. After the call ended, she dressed and drove into Midtown. The streets bustled with Monday life commuters with coffee cups. Buses groaning at their stops, a man in a suit talking too loudly into his phone. The ordinariness of it all contrasted sharply with the chaos in her chest. She stopped at a diner she and her father had once frequented, the kind with vinyl booths and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon upright. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with a silver bun, refilled her cup without asking. Rough morning, she said kindly. You could say that, Penny murmured. The waitress gave her a look that said she'd seen worse, then moved on. Penny sipped the coffee, bitter and grounding. She thought about Max waking up in the big house. He's probably already calculating what car to buy or which friends to flaunt his new wealth before. To be on the phone with contractors, maybe bragging? At the country club he'd never once been invited to. The image made her sick. Her father's words came back again. Justice isn't fair. It's what you fight for. Penny knew she wasn't ready to confront Max, not yet. She also knew she couldn't disappear. She did, he would rewrite the narrative, casting her as the sister who clung too long. The burden who was finally cast aside. No, she had to hold on to the truth. She opened the notebook, flipping past pages of dosages and lab results until she found her father's neat handwriting at the back. Notes he'd dictated when his energy allowed. Property deeds, loan schedules, the name of the community center project in East Atlanta. He'd poured millions into, a dream worth losing for, he'd said with a tired smile. Penny traced the ink with her finger. If Max had listened, if he had cared, he might have known their father was a man who valued people over profit. But Max never listened. Her thoughts were interrupted when the diner's bell jingled and a group of church ladies walked in. Their laughter warm and familiar. One of them spotted her and came over. Penny, honey, we missed you at the fellowship hall after the service yesterday. Penny forced a smile. I wasn't welcome. The woman frowned, understanding flickering in her eyes. Patted Penny's shoulder. Your father was proud of you. Don't forget that. After they left her, Penny sat a long while. The weight of those words settling in her bones proud. It had been so long since she'd felt anyone say it without condition. That evening, she drove past the old neighborhood. She didn't stop, didn't turn into the driveway. But from the street she could see the porch light burning, the swings still creaking in the warm breeze. Max's car gleamed in the drive, a shiny new model he must have leased that morning. Through the window, she glimpsed shadows of people, laughing, glasses raised. He'd already turned the family home into a stage for his performance of wealth. Penny gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was desecration. The home where their father had built his life, where lessons had been handed down over Sunday suppers, now cheapened into a backdrop for Max's ego. She pressed the gas and pulled away before the fury could break her. Back at the motel, she spread the notebook on the bed and laid the pecan pie beside it, untouched, since Mrs. Alvarez gave it to her. The smell of sugar and pecans filled the room, oddly comforting. She took a bite, the sweetness mixing with salt from tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Be steady, Pen," her father had told her. She repeated it now, a mantra. The storm was coming. Max didn't know it yet, but his empire was made of sand, and when the tide came in, he would find himself begging for a lifeline. Penny knew she couldn't stop that tide. All she could do was stand ready, steady, when it came crashing down. She closed the notebook and lay back, listening to the hum of the interstate. Atlanta's night stretched before her, restless and alive. Somewhere across town, her brother toasted to his imagined fortune. Somewhere, bankers and lawyers moved papers that would soon reveal the truth. And here, in a cheap motel room, Penny prepared herself for the fight ahead. She wasn't trash. She wasn't a parasite. She was her father's daughter. And when the dust settled, Max would learn that Penny woke to the sound of her phone buzzing against the nightstand. The shrill vibration cutting through the muffled hum of the motel's air conditioner. She blinked at the screen. It was just past 6 in the morning, gray light spilling through the blinds. And the caller ID showed a number she knew by heart. Max, her thumb hovered. Torn between answering and letting the call die in silence. She pressed decline and lay back, staring at the ceiling. It was too soon, too raw. She could still taste his words from the night of the will reading. The sting of being called trash, parasite, leech. He had gutted her with those insults, and nothing in 24 hours could undo that. Still, she knew her brother well enough to guess why he was calling. He wanted to boast. He wanted to rub her nose in his imagined fortune, maybe to parade a new car or deal. She dressed slowly, choosing a simple blouse and jeans, clothes that gave her comfort instead of pretense. The diner from yesterday tugged at her thoughts. The warm voice of the waitress who hadn't asked questions but had poured her coffee with the dignity of someone who understood hard mornings. Penny slid into her car, the old sedan coughing a bit before it settled, and drove into Midtown again. Atlanta bustled to life around her, trucks unloading at storefronts, buses crammed with commuters, the faint smell of fried bacon drifting from corner cafes. She felt like a ghost moving through a world that hadn't noticed her fracture. Inside the diner, the same silver-haired waitress waved. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. Penny managed a small smile. "Please." The cup was hot in her hands, grounding. She opened her father's notebook again, its pages familiar yet newly heavy. The entries marched across in his handwriting tidy firm. The ink a steady rhythm of a man who never lost his order, even as his body gave way. Property notes, project names, loan terms. At the back, the lines she had almost memorized. East. Atlanta Community Center loan collateralized, $500 million. Repayment uncertain. Penny sipped her coffee and thought about what Martin, the family attorney, had told her. Max would learn soon enough. The empire he thought he'd inherited was only smoke tethered to debts he didn't understand. But waiting for him to fall felt dangerous. He was her brother, and though she wanted to harden her heart, some part of her still saw the boy chasing fireflies, the child who had once leaned against her when thunder shook their house. Anger and pity waged war inside her chest. By afternoon, she found herself driving past the family home again. She told herself it was to see if the house needed anything. The lawn had gone wild, but the truth was simpler. She wanted to see if Max had already destroyed what was sacred. She parked at the edge of the street and watched from behind the shade of an oak tree. The porch light was on, though the sun blazed high, and in the driveway gleamed a vintage Mustang. Cherry red, so new it still had a temporary plate. She closed her eyes. He had wasted no time. Through the window, she saw shadows, moving figures, laughter spilling into the humid air. He had company. Men in golf shirts, women with jewelry that caught the light. Music played faintly. Not the hymns their father loved, but something loud and brash. the kind of music Max thought made him look young and untouchable. The porch swing creaked in the breeze, a sad reminder of quieter days. Penny's hands curled into fists against the steering wheel. Her father's house had become a stage, a prop in Max's desperate performance of wealth. She drove away before fury could choke her, pulling into a quiet church parking lot nearby. There she sat, tears prickling her eyes, the notebook open. On the passenger seat, she traced her father's words again. "Be steady, Pen." She whispered it aloud, letting the mantra steady her breath. She thought of Mrs. Alvarez's pecan pie, still wrapped in her motel fridge, a symbol of kindness when cruelty had left her raw. That pie and the casserole dishes neighbors carried in represented a truth Max would never understand: community, dignity, the wealth of belonging. That night Martin called again. "He's moving fast," the lawyer said. "Contracts, purchases, rumors. He thinks the money is already liquid." Penny closed her eyes. How long before he learns the truth? Soon. The bank isn't patient. Once they finalize the call on the loan, the accounts will be locked tight. He'll find out when his card stops working. She pictured Max in some restaurant, handing over a black card with a smirk, only to watch it be declined. She should have felt satisfaction. Instead, she felt a deep sadness, the kind that burrows into your bones. "And when he calls me again?" she asked quietly. "You don't owe him anything," Martin replied firmly. "Remember that?" Oh, but she wasn't sure she could forget. The years of loyalty, the sacrifices she had made without hesitation. Family wasn't a debt you paid off. It was a burden you carried sometimes until it broke you. The next morning she took her coffee outside the motel, sitting on the curb to watch cars stream past. The sky was streaked pink, the kind of dawn her father used to call God's brushstroke. She imagined him sitting beside her, his voice steady. "Justice isn't fair, it's what you fight for." The words were no longer just a memory, they were a command. She couldn't run from the storm that was coming. She had to face it. By midday, she found herself driving toward East Atlanta, toward the site of the community center her father had dreamed of. The building stood half-finished, weeds curling around chain-link fencing, graffiti sprawled across plywood boards. It wasn't much to look at, but Penny could almost hear her father's voice as he described it. Classrooms, basketball courts, a safe place for kids who had nowhere else to go. He had poured his fortune into it, and when it failed, he had staked everything to try to save it. Penny stood by the fence, the notebook in her hands, and felt a strange mix of grief and pride. Max saw only numbers. She saw the heart behind them. As she turned back to her car, her phone buzzed again. "Max," she hesitated, then answered. Its voice came through loud, drunk with triumph. "Pen, you should see it. The house is alive again. I had friends over. We toasted Dad's legacy. Everyone knows I'm the man now." She bit her tongue, listening to him ramble about cars, plans for renovations, trips he would take. Finally, she said, "Max, you need to be careful. That money isn't what you think." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You're just bitter, jealous. Don't call me when you need help, Penny. I've moved on. I've got everything I ever wanted." She hung up before the ache in her chest could spill into words. Alone in her car, she whispered again, "Be steady." She had tried to warn him, but he wasn't ready. The storm would have to teach him. That night, back in the motel, she unwrapped the pecan pie at last and ate it slowly, savoring the sweetness that reminded her of kindness, of neighbors who had seen her as more than trash. She looked out at the city lights glittering in the distance and promised herself she would endure. Max could strip her of a house, hurl insults that scarred, but he could not touch the truth. He could not erase the lessons their father had given her, and soon enough, when the illusion shattered, he would come to her. He would have no one else. Penny closed the notebook, set it on the nightstand, and turned out the light. Sleep came fitfully, but when it did, it brought dreams of her father's voice and the sound of cicadas in the Georgia night. She clung to both like lines, steadying herself for what lay ahead. Max's name was all over town by the end of the week. Penny could hardly step into the diner without overhearing someone mention her brother. Their voices half in awe, half in disbelief. "Did you see that car?" One man muttered over his eggs, shaking his head. "Cherry red Mustang, brand new. Parked it right out front of Rhodes's place like a trophy." Another chimed in, "I heard he's planning a full remodel. Set. He wants a theater room and an outdoor kitchen. Must be nice to wake up rich overnight." Penny sipped her coffee in silence, her eyes on the swirling black liquid, her jaw tight. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that the $500 million Max bragged about was a phantom, a loan tied up in a failed project, a sandcastle built too close to the tide. When she left the diner, Atlanta's sun glared down on the streets, bouncing off glass towers and hot pavement. She drove past Buckhead, where boutiques and car dealerships lined the roads, and sure enough, she saw it. Max stepping out of the dealership, keys dangling in his hand, grinning like a king. He was surrounded by two men she didn't recognize, both younger, both hanging onto his words like disciples. Penny slowed as she passed, unseen among the afternoon traffic, her stomach tightening. He was already turning his inheritance into theater, gathering people who wanted nothing but to bask in his illusion of wealth. By evening, the transformation of the family home was in full swing. Penny drove past once more, against her better judgment, and saw bright lights glowing through every window. Music thumped through the air, a heavy bass line that didn't belong to the quiet suburban street. Cars lined the driveway, expensive. Models with out-of-state plates. Voices rang out, laughter spilling into the humid Georgia night. The porch swing creaked in the wind, ignored now. It's just another relic in the backdrop of Max's show. Penny parked further down the block, hidden beneath the shade of an old oak, and watched. Her father's house, once filled with Sunday dinners and quiet evenings, now pulsed with strangers drinking and shouting. She saw a woman in heels stumble across the lawn, a glass of champagne in hand. A man clapped Max on the back as if congratulating him on some great victory. Max basked in it, his grin wide, his hands moving as he told stories she couldn't hear but could guess, stories about his sudden fortune, about how he was finally free of his burdens. Burdens. That word twisted in her gut. She knew he meant her. The next day, she met with Martin again at his office downtown. A modest building lined with shelves of legal books that smelled faintly of dust and wood polish. He poured her coffee and sat across the desk, adjusting his glasses. "He's spending fast," Martin said without preamble. "I've already had calls from contractors asking about funds. He hasn't even touched the reality yet." Penny leaned forward. "How long before it hits him?" "Not long," Martin said. "The bank is patient only up to a point. Once they close the grace period, the accounts will freeze. They'll find out then." "But Penny?" He hesitated. "You need to be careful. He's reckless, and when reckless men fall, they like to drag others down with them." Penny thought of Max's eyes, wild with greed, his insults still burning in her ears. "He already tried," she murmured. That afternoon she drove out to East Atlanta again, to the unfinished community center. The weeds had grown taller, swaying in the late summer breeze. Graffiti shouted in bright colors across the plywood. Kids' tags layered over one another like arguments on a wall. Penny stood at the fence, clutching her father's notebook. She could almost hear his voice, explaining why he poured everything into this place, to give kids a chance. To carve dignity out of concrete and paint. A dream worth losing for, he'd called it. Max would never understand. To him, money was only ever a crown to be worn, never a tool to build something bigger than himself. When Penny returned to the motel that night, she found 3 missed calls from Max. She didn't answer. Instead, she listened to the voicemails, his voice slurred with drink, triumphant and cruel. "Pen, you should have stayed. You could have had a seat at the table if you'd played nice. But you're too proud, always too damn proud. Now look at me. I've got friends, I've got cars, I've got everything. And you've got nothing." His laughter rang through the line, hollow, manic. She deleted the message and set the phone down. The ache in her chest grew heavier, but beneath it burned something steadier. Resolve. The following morning, Penny stopped by the church her father had attended for decades. The doors were open, sunlight spilling across polished pews. She sat near the back, the quiet wrapping around her like balm. Pastor Green approached, his steps slow, his eyes kind. "Penny," he said gently, sliding into the pew beside her. "I heard about what happened." She swallowed hard. "Everyone has. I suppose," he nodded. "Your father was a man of principle. People see what Max is doing now, but don't think they don't notice the difference." They do. Tears pricked. Her eyes, "I don't know if I can fight him. I don't even know if I should. Maybe I should just let it all collapse." The pastor folded his hands. "Justice isn't always about winning. Sometimes it's about standing firm so the truth doesn't get buried. Your father's name deserves that. So do you." The words settled into her heart like seeds. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Be steady, Pen." That night, she returned once more to the motel, the city lights stretching outside her window. From across town, she imagined the laughter spilling out of her father's house, the clinking of glasses raised to illusions. But she knew the tide was rising. Every dollar Max spent brought the collapse closer. And when the storm hit, when the sandcastle washed away, he would have no choice but to face her. She unwrapped the last of Mrs. Alvarez's pecan pie and ate it in silence. The sweetness, a reminder that not everything in her world was poisoned. Then she closed her father's notebook, laid it on the nightstand, and whispered once more into the dark. "Justice isn't fair. It's what you fight for." She didn't know if she was ready for the fight, but she knew she couldn't run from it. The reckoning was coming, and she would be steady when it arrived. The whispers began as soon as Penny walked into the grocery store. She could feel eyes on her, hear the low murmur of voices sliding down the aisles like drafts of cold air. "That's her," someone said near the produce, too loudly to be accidental. "The sister who got nothing. Can you imagine? After all that time, all those years, and she walks away empty." Another voice, softer but sharp, replied, "Well, maybe there's a reason. Maybe the father knew who deserved it." Penny kept her chin high, pushing her cart past rows of apples and oranges, but each word scraped against her like sandpaper. She wasn't angry at the gossip was a Southern pastime, but at how easily the story had shifted. Max was parading himself as the golden son, the heir who carried the family legacy, while she was painted as the hanger-on who had been cast aside. At the checkout, the cashier, a young man with braces, gave her an awkward smile. "Ah, I heard about your brother," he said. "He must be like crazy rich now, huh?" $500 million. That's wild. Penny handed over her cash. With a steady hand, "Money isn't everything," she said quietly. The boy chuckled. "Tell that to the rest of us." By the time she returned to her motel, her head was pounding. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her father's notebook, running her fingers over his writing. The truth was right here. She knew it. Martin knew it. But the rest of the world was drinking Max's champagne, believing every boast he made. She wondered how long it would last before the bank stepped in, before reality came crashing down. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a distant cousin. "Caney, I hate to say it, but Max told us you tried to fight the will. He said, you demanded money that wasn't yours. Everyone's talking. I just thought you should know." Penny's stomach dropped. The lie had spread faster than she'd expected. Max wasn't just basking in his false fortune. He was rewriting history, painting her as greedy and ungrateful. It was the perfect cover for him, and the cruelest twist for her. That evening, she drove to Martin's office, clutching the notebook like a shield. He welcomed her in, his desk covered in papers, his glasses perched low as always. "I knew you'd come," he said gently. "Started, hasn't it? The smear campaign." Penny sat heavily in the chair opposite him. "Telling everyone I demanded money. That I fought the will. They're starting to believe him. Martin leaned back, steepling his fingers. It won't matter when the bank steps in. But in the meantime, yes, he'll try to bury you. He knows the truth deep down. He knows he's living on borrowed time. So he's doing what desperate men do, making sure you're the villain. Penny's throat tightened. I can't let my father's name go down like this. He wasn't careless. He wasn't a fool. He built something real, even if the money's gone. Martin nodded. Then you stand steady. You don't argue with the whispers. You live in a way that proves them wrong. When the truth comes out, and it will, people will remember how you carried yourself now. The words gave her a measure of comfort, but the ache remained. That night in the motel, she thought about her father's voice, steady and warm. Dignity is the only wealth no one can take. She repeated it to herself until sleep finally claimed her. 2 days later, she attended Sunday service at the church, sliding into a pew near the back. The sanctuary was filled with familiar faces, neighbors, who had brought casseroles and pies to the house just a week ago. Now their smiles were hesitant, their eyes curious. The hymns rose, voices weaving through the stained glass light, but Penny felt the weight of their stares. After the benediction, Mrs. Jenkins approached, her hands folded tight. "Penny, dear," she said softly, "I hope you're holding up. Folks are talking, but I told them you were always the one who stood by your daddy. People forget things when money's in the air." Tears pricked Penny's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Behind them, she heard someone else mutter, "Still, it's strange, isn't it? All that money, and she's living in a motel." Penny turned away before the sting could show on her face. That afternoon, she drove past the family home again. The yard was littered with beer bottles, the grass torn from where cars had parked. A brand new grill gleamed on the porch, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent. Max stood in the driveway, laughing with 2 men, a cigar clenched between his fingers. He looked up as her car passed, his grin sharp and cold. He raised the cigar in mock salute, mouthing words she couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "Look at me now." She pressed the gas and didn't slow until she was clear of the neighborhood. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. He had taken their father's house and turned it into a circus. Worse, he had taken her reputation and ground it into the dirt. But she held on to one truth. Soon the circus would fold. That night back at the motel, she laid out the notebook on the bed and opened to her father's notes again. She thought about the community center, the dream he had poured himself into, the debt he had carried for it. She thought about the way Max dismissed it all, calling it a waste. And she thought about the children who might have had a place too. Belong if it had succeeded. Her father's dream was worth more than Max's cars or cigars. It was worth more than any rumor. As the clock ticked past midnight, her phone buzzed with another voicemail. Max's voice filled the room, slurred and venomous. "You should see it, Pen. They love me. Everybody wants a piece of me. And you're rotting in some motel. You were always second best. Always the afterthought. Dad knew it. That's why I've got it all and you've got nothing." His laugh followed, sharp and hollow. Penny sat in the dark, her jaw clenched, tears hot on her cheeks. She whispered to herself, steady as her father had taught her, "Justice isn't fair. It's what you fight for." She didn't know how long it would take, but she knew one thing for certain. Max's fall was coming. And when it did, she would not let his lies be the final word. She turned off the light, the city's glow spilling through the blinds, and lay awake listening to the night hum outside. Somewhere across town, Max was burning through his inheritance, building his empire of smoke. But here in her quiet room, Penny was holding on to something stronger. The truth. The summer heat in Atlanta pressed heavy against the city. It's the kind that stuck to the skin and made tempers rise. Penny felt it most in the afternoons, when the motel's air conditioner wheezed and struggled, leaving her to fan herself with a folded church bulletin. She spent her mornings at the diner or walking through Piedmont Park, The notebook always tucked into her bag, her father's words echoing whenever her mind slipped too far into despair. Still, each day brought new reminders of Max's reckless ascent. Billboards went up with his name sponsoring a local softball league. Glossy photos of him shaking hands with business owners appeared in the community paper, and every trip to the store seemed to carry another murmur about the Rhodes boy who had struck gold. What they didn't see were the cracks forming. Penny noticed them in the smallest places. At the diner one morning, she overheard two men at the counter. "That Rhodes kid still hasn't paid me." One of them grumbled, stabbing his fork into a pile of scrambled eggs. Said the funds were tied up, but he promised a check last week. The other man laughed. "Careful, it's got lawyers." Folks like that don't like being called liars. Penny stirred her coffee, her pulse quickening. Max wasn't paying his bills. The image of his empire glittered on the surface, but the foundation was already crumbling. Later that day, she drove past the family home again, unable to stop herself. The once pristine lawn was trampled, the hedges untrimmed, and the porch that had been her father's pride now bore cigarette burns along its rail. Max stood near the garage, barking into his phone, his voice carrying across the street. "I said, it's coming. The money's there. Damn it, just give me another week." He paced like a man cornered, his hand raking through his hair. Kenny lingered at the stop sign, watching as he finally noticed her car. His eyes narrowed, and he lifted his phone high in a mocking wave before turning his back. That night, her phone rang again. But it wasn't Max. It was Mrs. Jenkins, her father's longtime neighbor. "Penny, I hate to bother you," she began, her voice low, "but there's been trouble. Strangers coming and going at all hours, loud music, shouting. Doesn't feel right. That house used to be steady ground for this street, and now it feels like, well, like a nightclub." Penny closed her eyes, her hand tightening around the receiver. "I'll handle it," she said, though she wasn't sure how. The following Sunday, she walked into church again, her presence drawing the usual mix of sympathy and suspicion. This time, Pastor Green sought her out before the service. "Penny," he said quietly, "I've had calls. People are worried. Not just about Max, but about you. They see him rising and you fading. They wonder if your father's legacy has been lost." His gaze was steady but kind. "You want me to speak for you?" Penny shook her head. "Not yet. Let them believe what they want. The truth is coming, Pastor. Just have to wait." He laid a hand on her shoulder. "Waiting takes strength. Don't let it break you." The days stretched into weeks, and Max's extravagance grew louder. Penny heard he had hosted a party with a rented jazz band and hired bartenders, the kind of event that drew people from across the city. Photos flooded social media. Max grinning with a glass in hand, women draped on his arm, expensive suits. That didn't quite fit him right. Each image was a knife in Penny's side, but she forced herself to look, to remember. Pride was his downfall, and it was growing sharper by the day. One afternoon, she received another call from Martin. "The bank is moving," he said without pleasantries. "They've reviewed the collateral on your father's loan. A freeze is imminent. Within days, Max will know the truth." Penny gripped the phone, "And when he does, he'll panic," Martin said flatly. "And when he panics, he'll come for you. You won't have anyone else left to blame." That evening, Penny returned once more to the community center site. The weeds had grown taller, the fence sagging. She pressed her hands against the chain link, her eyes tracing the lines of the unfinished building. She imagined children running through its halls, classrooms filled with light, laughter echoing against the gym walls. Her father's dreams still pulsed here, even in ruin. She whispered into the twilight, "I'll protect this. I'll protect you." When she returned to the motel, another voicemail waited. This one was shorter, Max's tone sharp with desperation. "Pen, call me. We need to talk. Don't ignore me." The arrogance was gone, replaced by something jagged. Penny deleted it, though her hands shook. The storm was closer now. That night, she dreamed of her father sitting on the porch swing, the cicadas humming in the dark. Be steady, Pen, he whispered in the dream, his voice as strong as it had been before illness stole it away. You're the anchor now. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a steel resolve in her chest. The next morning she walked through the grocery store, again head high despite the whispers. A neighbor stopped her by the cereal aisle, a man who had once worked with her father on a zoning board. Penny, he said gently, I don't believe a word they're saying about you. I remember how you stood by your daddy. Max can put on all the shows he wants, but folks who know the truth know. Penny smiled, the first real smile in weeks. Thank you, she said. Outside, the air shimmered with heat, but for the first time it didn't feel suffocating. She climbed into her car, pulled the notebook from her bag, and laid it on the passenger seat. Her father's handwriting looked back at her, steady and strong. Justice isn't fair, it's what you fight for. She was ready to fight, not with shouts or accusations, but with dignity and patience. The collapse was inevitable, and when it came, she would be there to witness it. That night, as she sat by the motel window, she saw lightning flicker far off in the distance. A storm was brewing over Atlanta, both in the sky and in her brother's life. She whispered again into the night, Be steady, Pen. And for the first time, she believed she truly was. The storm that had brewed over Atlanta finally broke on a Thursday night, unleashing rain so heavy it blurred the streetlights into hazy halos. Penny sat by the motel window, listening to the drumming on the glass when her phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. She glanced at the screen. Max. For a moment, she considered letting it ring out, but something in her chest twisted. Against her better judgment, she answered, What do you want? She asked, her tone clipped. On the other end, Max's voice cracked with something she hadn't heard from him in years. Fear. Penny, I need you. They're coming after me. I don't know what to do. His words tumbled over one another, frantic, desperate. I don't know where else to turn. Penny closed her eyes, gripping the phone tightly. You threw me out of that house, Max. You called me trash. And now I know what I said, he cut in. His voice cracked again, the arrogance. Stripped away. I was wrong. I was stupid. Please, just don't hang up. Her silence stretched long enough for the thunder outside to fill the space between them. Finally, she said, Where are you? A long pause, then his voice, smaller now. The house. I can't leave. They said if I run, they'll find me anyway. Penny's mind spun. She didn't ask who they were, she already knew. Men he owed money to, the creditors, maybe worse. The rain outside felt like a warning. She could let him drown in the mess he created, but her father's words pressed in like a steady hand on her back. Justice isn't fair, it's what you fight for. An hour later, Penny pulled up outside the old Rhodes home. The house looked even more broken under the storm. The porch light flickered weakly, and through the curtains she saw Max pacing like a trapped animal. She stepped inside without knocking. The smell hit her, first stale liquor, sweat, something sour lingering in the air. Max stopped in the middle of the living room, his once sharp suit crumpled, his face pale, eyes rimmed with red. Pen, he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to fix this. For a long moment, she just stared at him, searching for the boy she used to protect, the brother who had once trailed behind her on childhood adventures. All she saw was a man cornered by his own greed. Start talking, she finally said. How much do you owe? His hands shook as he raked them through his hair. More than I can count. Investors, banks, private lenders. I kept borrowing, thinking the next deal would cover the last, but it didn't. And now they want everything. The house, the money, my name. Penny crossed her arms, her voice steady. You built your kingdom on lies, Max, and now it's crumbling. What exactly do you expect me to do? He looked at her with hollow eyes. Help me. You're the smart one. If you were always the one Dad trusted. Please just tell me how to make this right. She wanted to laugh at the irony. For weeks he had spat venom, calling her worthless, a parasite. And now, with the storm closing in, he was clinging to her like a drowning man. But the anger didn't rise the way she expected. Instead, a cold clarity settled over her. "You'll have to face them," she said. "There's no avoiding it." He shook his head violently. "They'll destroy me. You don't understand, Penny. They don't care about money anymore. They want blood." The words hung heavy in the air. Penny thought of Mrs. Jenkins's worried voice, of Pastor Green's warnings, of her father's dream rotting behind a chain-link fence. She felt the weight of it all pressing down. "Then you need to decide, Max. Are you going to keep running, or are you going to finally stand for something?" Lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face, twisted with fear. "I can't," he whispered. "I'm not strong enough." Penny stepped closer, her voice low but unflinching. "Then you'll borrow mine. But you're going to listen, and you're going to do exactly what I say. No more lies, no more games." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, relief. Maybe even hope. He nodded, slow and trembling. They spent the next hour piecing together the truth. Max confessed debts that stretched beyond reason, deals that had soured, men who had invested with promises he couldn't fulfill. Penny took notes in her father's old notebook, her pen scratching furiously as she forced Max to lay it all bare. Each detail painted a picture of recklessness, arrogance, and deceit. By the end, she shut the notebook and looked at him squarely. "This is worse than I thought, but it's not impossible." Max sagged against the couch, his head in his hands. "So, what now?" Penny's jaw tightened. "Now you face the storm. Papa, you'll meet with them. I'll be there. We tell you the truth, everything, no more running." His head shot up, panic wide in his eyes. "They'll kill me." Penny shook her head. "They want their money, Max. They want to know you're not hiding. Hiding makes you prey. Standing up, showing you're willing to own your mistakes, that might buy you enough time to make it right." The rain outside slowed to a steady drizzle, but the weight inside the house was heavier than ever. Max leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "Dad would hate me for this," he murmured. Penny swallowed hard. "Dad would hate what you've done, but he'd still want you to fight for what matters. The question is, are you going to?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, Max whispered, "If you're with me, maybe I can." Penny closed the notebook and stood. "I'll be there. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, Max. You burned that bridge. I'm only here because Dad taught me not to let this family's name sink without a fight." He nodded weakly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Penny turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to glance back. The storm had passed outside, leaving the streets slick and gleaming. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow, we start cleaning up the wreckage." As she stepped into the night, the cool air hit her face, washing away the heaviness of the house. She knew the road ahead would be brutal. Max's empire was built on sand, and tearing it down would take every ounce of resolve she had. But for the first time in weeks, she felt her father's steady presence beside her, guiding her steps. The fight for justice had begun, not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the quiet, rain-washed streets of Atlanta, where a sister chose to stand when her brother finally fell to his knees. Morning broke gray and muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Penny hadn't slept more than an hour, her mind chasing shadows of the plan she had stitched together during the night. She had seen fear before in soldiers returning from war, in neighbors losing their homes, but the look on Max's face last night haunted her differently. It wasn't just fear of losing money, it was fear of losing himself, of being swallowed whole by the debts and mistakes that had defined him. She sat at the diner across from the courthouse, nursing a cup of bitter coffee. The hum of conversation around her barely registered as she stared out the window, watching raindrops snake down the glass. At precisely 8 o'clock, Max arrived, his figure hunched, his suit hanging off him like it belonged to another man. His eyes darted around the diner as though everyone inside might be a threat. When he slid into the booth, he didn't look at her right away. "I almost didn't come," he muttered. Penny raised an eyebrow. "But you did. That's the first step." His fingers tapped nervously against the Formica table. What if this is a trap? What if showing up is exactly what they want? She leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Hiding is what they want. They thrive on fear. If you run, you're theirs forever. If you show up and face them, you have a chance to take the power back." Max swallowed hard and finally nodded. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, came by with a pot of coffee. "Can I get you something, hun?" she asked him. Max blinked as if he had forgotten how normal the world could be. "Just coffee," he mumbled. Penny noticed the way his hands trembled as he reached for the cup. He was unraveling thread by thread, and she knew this day would either break him or force him to finally grow into the man he was meant to be. They walked together to the courthouse annex where the meeting would take place. The building was old, with stone steps worn smooth by decades of feet. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and old wood. A narrow hallway led them to a conference room where 3 men already waited. Penny recognized the type immediately: expensive suits, sharp watches, but eyes that were colder than the rain outside. Predators dressed as businessmen. One of them, tall with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, gestured toward the chairs. "Mr. Rhodes, Ms. Rhodes, please, sit." Max faltered, his gaze flicking to Penny. She gave him the smallest nod, and he sank into the chair beside her. Penny remained standing a beat longer, letting the silence stretch before she took her seat. She wanted them to see that she wasn't just an accessory in Max's downfall. She was here with purpose. The silver-haired man folded his hands. "Max owes us a great deal. We've been patient. That patience is at an end." His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone that could terrify without raising in volume. Max opened his mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. Penny cut in, her tone even but sharp. "We're not here to deny what's owed. We're here to lay it bare, every deal, every misstep. And then we're going to find a way forward that doesn't end with blood on anyone's hands." For the first time, the man's eyes flicked to her, studying her like she was a puzzle piece he hadn't expected. "And who are you to speak?" For him, Penny didn't flinch. "I'm the one who still remembers what the Rhodes name used to mean. My father built something worth respecting. My brother lost sight of that, but he's still standing here. That counts for something." Room went quiet. One of the other men, shorter and rounder, let out a low chuckle. "Respect won't pay the bills, sweetheart." Penny leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Neither will a corpse." The words landed heavy, and for the first time, the round man stopped smiling. Max finally found his voice, shaky but audible. "I can make this right. I will. I just need time. Penny, she'll help me restructure everything. I'll sell what I have to. I'll work night and day. I just need you to give me a chance." His words tumbled out clumsily, but Penny saw something shift in him, an ember of resolve. Small but real. The silver-haired man leaned back, considering. Time is costly, and trust. Trust is even more expensive. He tapped a finger against the table, then fixed his gaze on Penny. "But maybe your sister's spine is worth something. You have 1 week. 1. If there's no progress, the debt is collected in other ways." The meeting ended as abruptly as it had begun. The men filed out, leaving the siblings in the silence of the conference room. Max slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. 1 week, he whispered. "That's nothing." Penny closed her notebook and stood. "It's more than you had yesterday. Now get up. We've got work to do." They spent the rest of the day combing through documents, bank accounts, contracts. Penny worked with relentless focus, her mind weaving connections, finding gaps, calculating possibilities. Max tried to keep up, though his shoulders sagged with every revelation of how deep he had sunk. By nightfall, the table was littered with papers, empty coffee cups, and the weight of a lifetime of mistakes. When they finally stepped out into the cool night air, Max looked at her with hollow eyes. "Why are you doing this? After everything I said to you, after what I did?" Penny paused, looking out at the city lights glowing against the dark sky. "Because someone has to fight for what's left of this family. And because Dad's voice doesn't let me walk away." She glanced at him then, her expression hard but not without compassion. "But don't mistake this for forgiveness. This is about survival, Max. Yours and mine." He nodded slowly, the truth settling over him like a heavy cloak. For the first time, Penny thought she saw a glimmer of humility in his gaze, the faintest spark of the boy she had once loved fiercely. Whether it would last, she didn't know. But she knew one thing with certainty. The week ahead would decide everything. As they walked toward the car, the night seemed to close in tighter around them. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a sharp reminder that time was running out. Penny's grip tightened on the keys in her hand. The storm wasn't over, it had only shifted. And now she and Max were standing directly in its eye. That we've moved like a train without brakes. Every day another test, every night another hour lost to exhaustion. Penny hadn't expected salvation in 7 days, but she had hoped for momentum. A crack in the wall that surrounded Max's mistakes. Instead, each lead ended in another dead end. Another door slammed in their faces. Still, she refused to stop pushing. By Thursday, the air itself felt heavier, as if the world were watching them stumble closer to a precipice. That morning, Penny stood in the cramped office they had rented downtown, staring at a whiteboard filled with figures, arrows, and names that looked more like a war map than a financial plan. Max sat slouched at the desk, his face pale, his hands twitching as though they couldn't rest. He had the look of a man walking toward his own execution. "It's useless," he muttered, voice low, bitter. "They set me up to fail from the beginning. I can't undo this." Penny turned sharply. "Then you're not paying attention. Every empire has cracks. You just haven't been willing to look for them." She pointed to a line of numbers on the board. "Here, this contract from 3 years ago, it was never filed properly. It means some of their claims on your assets are weaker than they pretend." Max blinked at the board, then shook his head. "Even if that's true, they won't care. They don't follow the law. They bend it until it breaks." Penny stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then we make the law work for us. You still have friends, Max, people Dad trusted. People who owe him favors, call them." For a long moment he stared at her. Then something in his expression shifted hesitation, giving way to determination. He picked up his phone and began to dial. Penny turned back to the board, feeling a flicker of relief. Max was finally taking action. Maybe they still had a chance. That afternoon they drove to meet one of those old allies, a retired attorney named Walter Hughes, who had been a close friend of their father. Walter lived in a modest brick house on the edge of town, the kind of place where the curtains were always drawn but the porch light never went out. He greeted them with cautious warmth, his eyes lingering on Max a moment longer than on Penny, as though measuring the truth in the younger man's face. Inside, Walter listened as they laid everything out, the debts, the threats, the 1-week ultimatum. He didn't interrupt, only leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Penny finished, silence stretched between them. Finally, Walter sighed. "Your father would have seen this coming. He always said the road's name carried weight, but that it also painted a target on your backs. Max, you let pride blind. You? Now you're paying the cost." Max's shoulders slumped, but Penny cut in before despair took root again. "We don't need a lecture. We need a path. Is there anything we can do?" Walter leaned forward, his voice steady. Maybe. Those men people like them don't rely on fear alone. They rely on the silence of others. If you can expose even a piece of what they've done, if you can make it public, they lose power. But it's dangerous. Once you shine a light on their shadows, they'll come for you. Penny felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She looked at Max, who stared at the floor, torn between cowardice and courage. For once, she decided not to wait for him. And we'll find the light. We'll gather whatever proof we can, and if it's dangerous, so be it. I'm done living in their shadow. Walter studied her a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Your father would be proud of that. I'll help where I can. But you need to move fast. By the time they left Walter's house, the rain had begun again, a slow drizzle that coated the windshield in silver streaks. Max was quiet as Penny drove, his reflection in the glass looking older, wearier. Finally he spoke, voice barely audible. Why are you the one leading this? I should be the one protecting you, not the other way around. Penny's grip on the wheel tightened. Then prove it. Stop saying what you should do and start doing it. I can't carry you forever, Max. The next day was a blur of digging old files from their father's office. Records in dusty town archives whispered conversations with people who owed the family debts of gratitude. Penny pushed harder than she had in years, her body running. On caffeine and stubbornness, her heart a drumbeat of urgency. Max followed her lead, less steady but at least no longer dragging his feet. They pieced together threads of corruption contracts doctored, land deals that smelled of bribery, names tied to crimes that had been swept under expensive rugs. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to suggest a rot that spread wider than Max's debts alone. On Friday evening, as the courthouse clock struck 9, Penny stood in the office again, staring at the growing pile of evidence. Her phone buzzed. A message, unknown number. Time's up tomorrow. Deliver or you'll wish you had. Read it twice before showing it to Max. His face went white. They're serious, Penny? What if they come after you? She met his gaze without flinching. Then let them. I won't back down. But deep inside, fear coiled tight around her ribs. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was survival, and not just theirs. The men they were fighting were bigger, crueler, with reach far beyond one family's downfall. That night, Penny sat alone by the window, the city lights shimmering like broken promises. She thought of her father, of the sacrifices he had made to keep their name respected. She thought of Max as a boy, chasing fireflies in the backyard, his laughter echoing through warm summer nights. That boy seemed gone, replaced by a man who had nearly destroyed them both. And yet beneath all the wreckage, she still believed he could be saved. As dawn crept over the skyline, Penny closed her notebook with finality. They had evidence. They had allies. And they had no choice but to act. Today would decide everything, their survival, their family's legacy. She turned to Max, who had fallen asleep at the desk, his head resting on a pile of papers. Wake up, little brother, she whispered. The storm's here. Time to face it. Saturday arrived like a clenched fist, every tick of the clock, hammering louder than the last. Penny had barely slept, her mind running endless circles around the threats, the evidence, and the narrow window left to act. She sat at the same desk where the whiteboard loomed behind her, lines and scribbles like a battlefield map. Max was pacing the room like a caged animal, his face drawn tight with panic. The text message from the night before still burned in both their minds. Time's up tomorrow. They knew what that meant. Penny rose, her voice cutting through the tension. We've got enough to shake them. But if we stay quiet, all of this ends with us buried, one way or another. We go public, Max. It's the only way. Max stopped, pacing his hands trembling as he ran them through his hair. Public, Penny? That's suicide. They'll come after us harder than before. They'll destroy us. Penny stepped closer, locking eyes with him. Maybe it's the only way to make sure they can't bury this in the dark. People like them rely on silence. We don't give it to them." He stared at her, his fear battling with something deeper, something older, a loyalty he had nearly forgotten. At last he gave a slow, reluctant nod. "If we do this, we do it now. Before they come knocking." The first call Penny made was to Walter Hughes. He answered groggily, but listened with the sharp attention of a man who had lived too long around. Danger to ignore its smell. "If you go public," Walter said after she laid it all out, "you need to do it with protection. A lawyer who can shield you, a journalist who won't back down, and evidence strong enough to survive their attempts to bury it." Penny nodded, even though Walter couldn't see her. "We have some of that. We'll get the rest today. Bye." Mid-morning, they were sitting across from a local investigative reporter named Claire Donovan. Claire was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a voice that carried both weariness and steel. She listened carefully as Penny and Max laid out their findings, every document, every number, every shadow of corruption that linked the men who threatened Max to larger schemes. When they finished, Claire leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "This is dangerous," she said flatly. "These aren't petty criminals. They have money, reach, and no conscience. But—" she tapped a finger against the stack of files. "If this is real, if it checks out, it's the story of a decade. I'll need to verify every detail, but I can make sure it sees daylight." Max leaned forward, desperation leaking from his voice. "If you don't, I'm dead. She's dead." Claire's gaze shifted to Penny, measuring her resolve. Penny met her stare without blinking. "We're not asking for mercy, just truth. That's all." Claire gave a single nod. "Then let's burn their shadows down." The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Penny and Max followed Claire through interviews, document scans, hidden archives pulled from courthouse basements. Every step closer to exposure brought more tension, the feeling of eyes on their backs, of footsteps that never seemed far behind. Twice Penny thought she saw the same dark sedan trailing them, but when she turned sharply, it would vanish into traffic. Max grew jumpy, his hand twitching toward his phone as if dialing for help he couldn't define. By late afternoon, they returned to the office with Claire, who spread the evidence across the desk in neat, ruthless order. "Tomorrow morning, publish," she said. "Print online everywhere. They'll know before the ink's dry. And you'll need to be ready." Penny's chest tightened. Ready? The word meant so much and so little. Ready for retaliation. Ready for violence. Ready for the truth to either save them or ruin them. Max swallowed hard. "And if they come for us tonight?" Claire looked at him with a grim sort of sympathy. "Then you hold on until morning." As night fell, the city outside seemed to pulse with menace. Penny couldn't shake the sense that the storm had arrived. She stood at the window of their office, watching headlights flash on wet pavement, every car a possible threat. Behind her, Max sat hunched, his hands clenched around a coffee cup he didn't drink. His fear filled the room, thick enough to choke. Finally, Penny turned. "Max, listen to me. Whatever happens tonight, tomorrow, this ends. Either we're free or we're ashes. But we're not running anymore." He lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something like the boy he had once been, a flicker of trust, of leaning on her, not out of weakness, but recognition. "I don't deserve your fight," he said hoarsely. "I'll stand with you." Just after midnight, the knock came, 3 sharp raps that echoed like gunshots in the silence. Penny froze, her breath caught. Max shot to his feet, pale as bone. Claire, still awake at the desk, reached quietly for her phone. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice muffled through the door. "Time's up. Open it." Max's knees buckled, but Penny moved forward, every nerve screaming, yet her body steady. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling silence, then turned to Claire. "Call Walter. Call the police. Don't hang up." She stepped closer to the door, her hand brushing the cold metal handle. The voice outside growled, "We know you're in there. Don't make us break it down." Penny closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her father's words echoing in her memory. Courage is not the absence of fear, but standing when fear demands you kneel. She drew a deep breath and opened her eyes, steady as steel. "If you want us," she whispered to herself, "come through the truth first." The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Max flinched, stumbling backward. Claire's phone lit up with Walter's name, her voice urgent into the receiver. Penny stood her ground, her heart pounding like a war drum, knowing this was at the crisis, the breaking point. And beyond that door, shadows waited to decide whether the Rhodes family legacy would rise again or fall forever. The first blow rattled the hinges, a violent crack that echoed down the hallway and through Penny's bones. Max pressed his back to the wall, his breath shallow and broken, while Claire's voice rose on the phone, urgent, controlled, reciting their location to Walter and to the police dispatcher who had joined the line. Penny, standing just feet from the door, forced herself not to move, not to betray the quake of terror running through her chest. Another strike came, this one louder, the wood splitting faintly under the pressure. The men outside weren't bluffing, they were coming in. Penny's mind raced. The truth was already on its way to being published by Claire's newsroom. The files were uploaded, timed for morning release. Their enemies knew that. Tonight wasn't about threats anymore, it was about silencing them before the sun rose. She turned toward Max, whose wide eyes locked onto hers like a drowning man begging for air. "Max," she whispered, sharp and quick, "go to the back exit. Now, if they break through, I'll hold them long enough for you to get clear." He shook his head wildly, panic overtaking him. "No, Penny, I can't leave you." "Do it," she snapped, her voice a whip. "If you stay, we both die. If you go, at least one of us has a chance." Before Max could respond, the door gave way with a deafening crash. Splinters flew, hinges snapped, and 3 men in dark jackets surged through the frame. Their faces were hard shadows, mouths twisted with the certainty of predators who had cornered prey. Penny didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy lamp from the side table and hurled it with every ounce of strength she had, smashed against the lead man's shoulder, sending him staggering. "Run, Max!" she shouted. Max bolted toward the back, but one of the men lunged sideways, blocking his path. Penny charged forward, slamming into the attacker with her full weight, shoving him against the wall. Pain shot up her arm, but she didn't stop. Claire screamed. Into the phone, "They're here. They're breaking in now. Send units now." Line crackled with urgent promises of help. But Penny knew minutes could be an eternity. The second man swung at her, his fist grazing her jaw and knocking her to the floor. White pain exploded in her head, but she rolled away before he could strike again. Max, halfway to the back door, froze in horror at the sight of his sister bleeding on the floor. Something in his expression shifted, like a veil-tearing fear, giving way to rage. He lunged back toward the fight, grabbing a chair and slamming it into the attacker's back. The man grunted, falling forward. Penny scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged, her body screaming with pain, but her spirit refusing to bend. The third man pulled a knife, its edge glinting in the dim light. "Stay down," he growled, advancing toward Max. Penny stepped between them, blood trickling down her lip, her stance defiant. "You'll touch him over my body," she said, her voice low, unwavering. The knife wielder sneered, stepping closer. For a second, the room shrank to that single blade, that single heartbeat of decision, and then, through the chaos, came the blare of sirens. The men froze, curses spilling from their mouths. "Cops!" one shouted. The sound was close, too close. They couldn't finish what they came for without being caught. In a flurry of curses and snarls, they backed toward the shattered doorway. The knife wielder leaned close, his breath sour against Penny's cheek. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You've just signed both your deaths." Then, like shadows breaking apart, they were gone, retreating into the night. Penny collapsed against the wall, trembling as the adrenaline drained from her. Max rushed to her side, his hands shaking as he touched her shoulder. "Penny, oh God, you're bleeding." She caught his wrist, gripping hard despite the pain. "I'm alive. We're alive." That's enough for now. Moments later, uniformed, officers flooded the building, weapons drawn, scanning every corner as Claire, still on the phone, waved him toward the broken door. Walter himself arrived not long after, his face grave, his eyes scanning Penny and Max as though counting limbs. "Measuring survival. They'll try again," Walter said grimly, once the officers had secured the scene. Tonight was desperation. "Tomorrow will be war. But you've bought yourself something they fear more than guns, Daylight." True to his words, Dawn arrived with an eruption of truth. Claire's article went live at 6 a.m., plastered across every digital screen in the city. By 7, radio stations were quoting from it. By 8, television anchors were broadcasting the details with solemn voices. The corruption and crimes of the powerful men laid bare for the world to see. Penny and Max sat side by side in Walter's office, battered but unbroken, watching the world react. For Penny, it was vindication but not victory. She knew the men exposed wouldn't vanish overnight. They would fight, claw, manipulate, and threaten until their last breath. But for the first time, she felt the balance tilt not in their favor, but in hers. For Max, the morning was something else entirely. He stared at the screen, tears welling, as if realizing the true cost of what had nearly happened. His sister, the woman he had mocked and cast aside, had stood in the fire for him when no one else would. He turned to her, voice cracking. "Penny, I don't know how to undo what I said, what I did. I treated you like trash, like you didn't matter when you've been the only one keeping me alive." Penny looked at him, her face softening despite the pain etched across her bruised skin. "Max, words can wound, but actions can heal. Start now. Stand with me, not behind me. That's all I ask." Silence lingered, heavy and sacred. Max bowed. His head then lifted it with a determination Penny hadn't seen in years. "I will. I swear it. I'll never leave you to fight alone again." The day stretched on with endless calls, police wanting more statements, lawyers demanding clarity, journalists pressing for interviews. But through it all, Penny and Max remained together, side by side, like a fortress rebuilt from ashes. Every so often, Penny would catch Max glancing at her with something new in his eyes. Not guilt, but respect. The same respect others had long given her. But he had been too blind, too arrogant, consumed by greed to see. That night, when exhaustion finally forced them to rest, Penny found herself staring out the window of Walter's office at the city lights. Somewhere out there, enemies still lurked. Somewhere out there, more battles waited. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. For the first time, Max was not just her burden, but her brother again. And that, more than any revelation, was her strength, yet in the quiet corners of her mind. She knew the final act still waited, the reckoning neither of them could escape. Tomorrow or the day after, the men who had tasted exposure would strike, back harder than ever. And when they did, Penny would be ready not just with evidence, but with fire, with resolve. And with the unbreakable bond of blood reforged in betrayal and survival, the city woke that morning to headlines blazing across every paper, every screen, every radio dial. Words like corruption, betrayal, and justice filled the air, and for once they weren't empty slogans, but truths clawed out of the dark. Penny sat at the long oak table in Walter's office, a fresh bandage along her jaw, the ache in her body reminding her of every punch, every kick, every near miss that had almost ended her life the night before. Max was beside her, still pale, but steadier than she had seen him in years, his fingers restless as if struggling to grasp the weight of all that had changed. Claire stood by the window, phone in hand, watching the cascade of news alerts that confirmed the story had gone far. Beyond their circle, national outlets were picking it up now. Senators were calling for hearings. The machine had been rattled, and the men who once seemed untouchable were stumbling. Yet Penny knew better than to believe it was over. For every headline, there was a shadow. For every public outcry, there was a backroom deal waiting to strangle the truth before it grew roots. By noon, Walter's office was buzzing with activity. Detectives came in and out, scribbling notes, asking Penny and Max to retell every detail of the break-in. Claire's newsroom sent photographers who wanted to capture Penny's bruised face for the story of resilience. She refused the camera. Her dignity not for spectacle. Instead, she gave her words, her memory, her resolve. Max stayed close, silent at first, but slowly he began to speak up. Filling in details, correcting points, standing as a witness not just to the attack, but to the transformation happening inside him. Truth has a way of cutting deeper than fear. Walter muttered at one point, watching the chaos unfold with arms folded. Penny caught his gaze, reading the caution in his eyes. He'd lived through enough wars, legal and otherwise, to know how relentless the powerful could be when cornered. They'll try to smear you, Penny. They'll dig into your past, twist your loyalty into suspicion, paint you as bitter, vengeful, unstable. She straightened her back, meeting his warning with steady calm. Let them, she said. I've lived through worse than whispers. I'll live through this too. But it wasn't whispers that came first. Was fire. That evening, as dusk settled, news broke of an arson attack at a local storage facility. One that had housed decades of financial records tied to the very men now under investigation. The flames consumed ledgers, contracts, entire boxes of proof. Watching the footage on television, Penny felt the burn in her chest hotter than the fire on the screen. They were already erasing their sins, already trying to silence what could not yet be proven. Max slammed his fist against the table, startling everyone. They think they can just burn the evidence and walk free. After everything. His voice cracked with fury, but beneath it was a different note resolve. He turned to Penny. What do we do now? We can't let this end here. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the boy who had mocked her. Not the arrogant man who had called her trash, but her brother, finally. Standing beside her. We fight smarter, she said. They've destroyed paper, but they can't destroy every witness, every memory, every scar they've left behind. Truth isn't just in boxes, it's in people. That night, Penny and Max followed Walter and Claire into the deeper labyrinth of resistance. They met with whistleblowers who had long stayed silent out of fear. They recorded testimonies in hidden rooms, whispered stories of bribes, threats, disappearances. Each voice added to the chorus of evidence, a song too loud to ignore. Penny's presence gave them courage. Her bruises spoke louder than any plea. Max's presence surprised them. His name carried weight. His transformation from complicit heir to defiant witness, becoming a story of its own. Together, they built not just a case, but a movement. But with every step forward came shadows darker than before. Threatening letters arrived at Walter's office. Cars followed them through empty streets. Once, as Penny returned from a diner, late at night, a man across the road lifted his hand as if in greeting, only for the moonlight to glint off the steel of a gun tucked beneath his coat. He didn't draw it, not that night, but the message was clear. They were being watched. Were being hunted. Max, shaken, begged her to stop. Penny, please. Maybe we've done enough. Maybe the article, the hearings, that's enough to make them bleed. She turned on him sharply, her voice steel. Enough. Do you think half-truths and burned? Evidence will be enough for the people they've crushed, the families they've buried. Do you think Dad would have wanted us to stop here? Max swallowed hard, her words slicing through his fear. For once, he didn't argue. He only nodded, the fight in him reforged by her fire. The climax came weeks later in a courthouse bursting with reporters and barricades of police. Penny, Max, Claire, and Walter walked through the gauntlet of flashing cameras, their steps in unison. Inside, the testimonies they had gathered were read aloud, one after another, painting a portrait of corruption so grotesque it made senators pale and citizens weep. Penny took the stand herself, recounting not only the attack on her life but the years of intimidation, the blood money, the invisible chains these men had used to bind a city. Her words carried not just fact, but the raw weight of survival. Max followed, his voice trembling but clear, confessing his own blindness, his complicity, his awakening. He spoke of betrayal, his of her, theirs of everyone, and pledged himself to making it right. When the gavel finally fell, it wasn't the end, not truly. The men they fought would appeal, would scheme, would fight back in shadows. But something irreversible had shifted. The tide had turned. The truth was out. The city had heard that night, after the courthouse emptied and the cameras shut off. Penny stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the silent crowd that lingered still, as if unwilling to let go of what they had witnessed. Max came too, her side, his hand tentative on her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head, her gaze steady on the horizon. "We did it, and we'll keep doing it, 'cause justice isn't a moment, it's a fight that never ends." The wind carried her words into the night, into the ears of strangers who had once been silent, into the hearts of those who had once been afraid. Penny knew battles still waited, darker storms still brewing. But with her brother beside her, with truth as her weapon, she no longer feared the fire. She was the fire. The story teaches us that justice is never easy, but it is always worth the fight. Wealth and power may try to silence the truth, yet courage and integrity can outlast any corruption. Even betrayal can be transformed into redemption when we choose to stand together. In the end, the real strength lies not in money or influence, but in the unshakable will to defend what is right.